Hello there. Can everybody hear me okay? Yes, right. Good, good, good. Okay. So you are very, very welcome here to the Linden Library. And you're really welcome whether you are an absolute Rosemary aficionado and you have read all of the 6 short story collections and that you've seen as many of the plays as you possibly can, you're welcome. You're also very, very welcome if you just happen to be passing and thought to yourself, that looks maybe an interesting thing to call into. So everybody is very, very welcome here. What I intend to do is this. I intend to chat to Rosemary for about 40 minutes or so, roughly round about that. We'll also hear her read a little, which should be very enjoyable for us. But it's not just about what I think about the stories, or even what Rosemary thinks about the stories. We're also as well interested in what you think. So we will have probably about 20 minutes or so at the end where we can have some sort of dialogue, and you can ask Rosemary about her writing. How does that sound? Does that sound okay? And just to add, you know, as far as I'm concerned, Rosemary is one of Northern Ireland's most loved writers. Her work is, as Patsy was saying, you know, it's engaged, it's humane, it's funny, it can be very mischievous as well at times. Plays have been performed in Dublin, London, Edinburgh, Brussels, New York, Washington, DC, and even Belfast. And it is really exceptional for someone, I think, to have written 6 short story collections. I really think that's pretty unusual. Rosemary, don't you?
Yeah, I'm trying to think anyone, not in contemporary. I mean, William Trevor did 12 or, at least 12. So, yeah, he was the total. He pumped them out like a factory, really. But I mean, they were all beautifully crafted as well. So,
as your own.
Absolutely, yeah.
So we have got short story collections here that have been shortlisted for an EU prize for literature, and also as well the Edgehill Short Story Award. And we're looking today particularly at Love in the Time of Chaos, latest collection, bold, brave, immensely readable. So I suppose the most obvious thing, Rosemary, I want to ask you at the beginning is 6 short story collections later, what is it that attracts you to this form? Because it's a strong attraction.
Yeah, well, just the total, the fact that you can do it at any moment. It's whatever, something pops into your head, it's very easy to write a short story. It's not a great investment in time, or, I mean, it is over time. I think the secret of the short story is how many times I edit it myself. So, but doing the actual first draft is a very quick event. Usually it takes me 2-3 days to actually do a short story. And so it's a brilliant thing that you can fit in between plays. And I suppose that's the thing, because I write in different genres, essays and things, so that it means I can move around. So that's what is so attractive about the short story. And also just, it's a beautiful, I think it's a beautiful lyrical form, and yet it can be incredibly conversational and chatty. You know, there's so many different varieties of, I mean, in a short story, they don't have to all be in the same genre or style. And I think that's the beauty of a short story collection, that you've got so much variety, and that keeps the form so incredibly interesting to me and dynamic.
Do you think they're quite, sometimes people have said they're quite a democratic form, in the sense that, you know, if you're a carer, if you've got kids, if you've got a busy job, if you're off doing other things, you can probably commit to writing a short story in the way that you can't with possibly a bigger ongoing project like a novel.
Yeah, well, with the novel, you lose the thread. I find you lose the thread and the will to live with it, really. You know, I mean, that's the trouble. Once you have a long break, anything can happen in life. You know, somebody in your family gets ill or something, you're taken away. So that's the beauty of this, is that, you can do a book, but they're all, in bite-sized pieces and diverse. Yeah.
One of the things I was thinking about the short story is that it's really our natural medium as people. You know, that if you meet a friend for coffee, or if you meet a friend for a drink, essentially what you do is you trade short stories, you know, and so people might think that they don't know how to write short stories, but in essence, everybody does, because everybody knows how to tell a story. You know, wait till you hear this, you're not going to believe it. You know, everybody's got their little strategies that they use. So do you think you're just a good storyteller? If people are out for a drink with you, or coffee for you, you good at telling stories, do you think?
More of a story gatherer.
Oh, yeah.
I'm good at that. Story stealer even, some people might accuse me of. Yeah, I mean, I think some of the stories in this collection, like when I went to Ukraine, really one of the stories is about me meeting aid workers and his story. Well, it was an aid worker's story of going to the front line and what it was like. So really, you know, and that's it. I'm good at going to bars, because in bars people tell you that. So that, yeah, I think most of my stories are gathered just on those random visits.
Do you think people ever get nervous around you, Rosemary? Think that Rosemary might be using this for one of her stories?
Terribly. Yeah, I have had a few problems with that in the past. And in fact, yeah, there's one in India, and it's really based on, it's a kind of, we went on a literary festival, me and 3 others, and you can probably find out who they were on the internet, and it's incredibly, maybe a friend of mine said you're really breaking confidences and things sometimes through that, but I don't think so, because you change it up, you change details, and in your own head, even though it's reality, it sort of seeps into fiction. So I never think of it as reality. And that's the weird thing. It's only later I realized, oh my God, that is so close to somebody's life. And then at the very end, the final editing of the short story collection, I'm trying to change physical details, whatever, you know, is this too close? But yeah, I mean, but sometimes it's really strange. You write about friends and you think they're going to be furious at this. And then they think it's about somebody else. They don't actually realize. So sometimes, yeah, you're surprised who's offended and who isn't. So, yeah.
There was an analogy that you used to compare short story writing to writing a novel. And you were saying that a novel was like regular sex, whereas the short story was like a series of tantric delights. Would you still maintain that? Do you like that analogy?
I love that analogy. Yeah, I mean, having fun with that whole thing. Yeah, I'm not going into the depths of how physically that works, but yeah, but it is. Yeah, those are. Yeah, I mean, I've also said it was like having sex with a stranger in the dark. I think I like these sexual analogies with short stories, because they're kind of like, I think it was Laurie Moore who actually said that this short story is like it's like a one-night stand, whereas the novel is the long relationship. So, I mean, I think sexual analogies and relationship analogies are perfect between the short story and novel.
I mean, I think one of the things that initially put me off writing short stories was the whole sort of short story arcana. The whole, it can be very, very technical, and it can be very off-puttingly theoretical. A lot of the stuff to do with a short story, you know, don't introduce a character, you know, 3/4 of the way through, don't do this, don't do that. You get attend out of the short story events for the rest of your life and never read them. So I kind of think I think your analogies are great, Rosemary. And in terms of the pleasures for a reader of a short story, do you think from the reader's point of view that the pleasure is a different one to reading a novel?
Oh, is pleasure different? Yeah, well, it is. It's got to be because it's more getting into the mind of the writer and the moods of the writer, and yeah, I mean, obviously it's not a story and there's no narrative, and it is difficult. I think it's challenging sometimes to move from style to style, but I think I don't even think the reader has to read a full collection. I think you can choose the ones that appeal to you and not even bother with the rest if you don't like them. So that's the beauty about that. You can dip in and leave.
Because quite often at these events, one of the big questions that people ask is, how did you order your collection? You know, how did you decide to put this one first, and what were the kind of principles whenever you were ordering them? and yet that does presuppose that people read them in the order that you've placed them. And you would think that many people wouldn't actually do that.
Yeah, I don't read short stories right from the start. No way. You just go for the first line, maybe that you like, or something, or a title that you like, and I think that's it. But I mean, it is. I try to, when I'm doing ordering, I sort of do a serious one and a couple of serious ones grouped together, maybe a couple of fun. Just mix it up a bit, really. I think, and I don't know, it's just an instinctive sense, and there's no right or wrong, or actually really a better order. Yeah, it could go in many orders, and I think as long as you start off with a kind of strong story that you think is sort of has an impact. I think it's an impact, really. Yeah.
Well, why not? That might be a really nice point for us to look at. Your first story. And your first story is The Crosshair, and this is the one that you did choose to have at the beginning. Whether or not you read it first is entirely up to you. I mean, I remember somebody said, people buy your book and take their dinner off it, you know? It's entirely up to them to do what they want. But would you like to talk a little bit, Rosemary, about this story and what you were dealing with here in terms of ideas or characters, or, you know, what does this present to a reader?
Yeah, this really was about writing a memoir, which I have done, and but it's really about writing a memoir about the Troubles, and it's about a man who decides to write his memoir because it seems it's something traumatic that happened to him in the past, and of course this is all transgenerational trauma coming through, and we know this. So it's really his decision whether it's too risky for him, because he might be giving names of the past of somebody who has killed somebody. And so it's really the fear of modern paramilitaries around us, whereas it's the kind of urge to tell the story. So it's really a story about telling a story, I think. And it is a story within a story. It's his past coming back to him. So I felt it would be for that reason, I felt it'd be a very strong beginner.
Sometimes people say that what you should do with your first story, obviously it's presupposing that that's where a reader is going to start, is you should produce something that's not super left field in terms of what you as a writer try to do. So you don't want to give people a false steer as to what kind of a collection it is. Would you say that this is a typical Jenkinson story? Would you say that this is one that fairly encapsulates what you're trying to achieve?
Yeah, I would, although of course there's totally two sides to me. I'm kind of like totally schizophrenic as a writer. There's these quite serious, in a way, quite serious political commentary, and then exceptional sort of, flippant sexual comedy, you know, so there's a lot, two diverse sides. And I think that I do that in my plays as well. I think I do it in everything. I like, two totally varying styles.
But would you say that those two dimensions of what it is that you are drawn to write about coexist within the same stories?
Yeah, sometimes. Yeah, I do think there's crossover, because I think there's black humor certainly in that first opener, and I think so. It's really probably the humor and some wit that probably drives the whole collection through, I'd say. Yeah.
Because I felt that you know, the first story is very funny. You know, there's places where I'm laughing. It's really beautifully observed. It's very, very funny. And then there was just a little thing about remembering something that Columba McVeigh's mother said, and I was just pulled out into a different world. I thought it was done so skillfully.
Great, yeah. Well, that is it. It's trying to lift that blackness, isn't it? You're always trying to do that so that it all fuses together. But it is, it's a balance. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And in terms of so many of your stories being set in Belfast, not all of them, but so many of them are. What does that do? Do you think, in terms of a collection, having most of the stories set in the same place?
Yeah, it does. You are trying to really do a portrait of a city. I mean, I do think I'm trying to do that when I write a collection, that it is important to convey contemporary Belfast in all its mad sort of and colourful ways. So yeah, I'm definitely definitely, I think it's, yeah, something, because I suppose that is the unifying, it's another unifier style you've got, and you've got place. But I mean, I do have, as I say, India. Actually, the only one I think there isn't a Northern Irish character is in the Ukraine one. That's the only one. Otherwise, there's always some Northern Irish link.
Would you like to talk a little bit about Ukraine and what you've been up to?
Up to, yeah. Yeah, so I wanted to go to Ukraine because of the war, and I felt it was the most important thing since World War II, or biggest war since World War II, and I wanted to observe that because it's important to me as a writer to see that, and particularly in Belfast having had a war itself, I think to see parallels and contrasts and everything. So from a writer, it was really incredibly important. So I've been 3 times, and I've been to Kyiv and Kharkiv and Kherson, and it's shocking. It's shocking what you see in terms of, yeah, bombs. And well, I didn't see any, but I heard them, a lot of them, and it's frightening, and it's all those things that challenge you as a writer, and I want to write about it passionately. Just, yeah.
There was something that you said in the Irish Times, Rosemary. I believe a skilled writer can always find the human element to transmute plain politics into fictional gold, and that was what you said. And I just wanted to ask you if you could just talk a little bit more about that. What you meant there about finding the human element to sort of transmute it into fiction.
Yeah, so everything is just character, as we know. So yeah, it's completely, yeah. If I talk about Ukraine again, it's not about the war, it's just about the individuals who are totally caught up in that. And yeah, so it's just that terrible fear they have, whatever, it's all just human emotions. That's how you get the story. And in fact, when I was saying that quote, I was referring to the very last one, which is the very last story in the collection is about storming the border, and it's on the new Irish border, on the in Larne. So I think I was trying, how the hell do you make that interesting for the reader? Sort of like, yeah, that's not, because the whole thing about the Northern Irish Protocol is it's papers, documents, it's not exciting. It's not like the Troubles were with flesh and blood and violence. So how do you make it exciting? So it was really through the story of somebody who works on the sea border, and it was about his family. You bring in the family, don't you? If you want to give emotions, yeah, it's their dynamics.
Are there any of the stories that you would say, because you're saying about the sort of primacy of character, are there any stories that you would say started with an idea rather than the characters? So I suppose just generally, which comes first for you? Or is it the people, or would it be the ideas?
Yeah, that's idea always, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's either, I would get something, either it's the anecdote, but of course it could come from the character, the person who's telling me the anecdote. I mean, I'm not saying that, but it will have to be some sort of idea that can be formed into a story that I think would work as a story, because otherwise I might do something, use it in an essay or anything, if it isn't storyable. Yes. So that's really, yeah.
So we're going to come on these essays of yours in a minute or two. But this idea of the story, what do you mean? Whenever you say the story of something being storyable, which I like it as a term, what do you mean by that? Is it something that's like it's a complete and satisfying thing for a reader to encounter, or what is that? The sort of storyable dimension?
Something that is just of its time, that just is something that people are thinking about or might think about.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm not exactly sure, Wendy. That's a good question, but.
And are the stories, because it fascinates me that you're a playwright as well, and do stories operate differently in a play than in the short story? The reason I ask is that my mom, whenever I started to write short stories, my mom said, I wish you didn't write short stories. And I said, why? And she says, because they make me feel so stupid. I feel stupid when I finish one. And I know what she meant. You know, that sort of, Well, what was that about? The sort of inconclusive dimension?
Yeah. Oh, it is inconclusive. I mean, I think you can't really be inconclusive in a play, and that is a huge difference. You really have to have a resolution for the actors and for the characters. So it is.
Yeah. So interesting. Tell me about the title of this book, because we've got Love in the Time of Chaos, and we have a story that's called Love in the Time of Lockdown. So I wondered if you could tell us about the story, Love in the Time of Lockdown, but also why we have got Love in the Time of Chaos for the title.
So I think you've probably worked this out, sort of that Love in the Time of Lockdown was a potential first title, but it would have dated it too much in COVID. So, and of course that's Gabriel Garcia Marquez, most people know that it's a slight rip-off from Love in the Time of Cholera, only trying to cash in on his fame, obviously. And so that's really it. But chaos suited because I was talking about Brexit, COVID, cost of living crisis, Ukraine. So chaos seemed to be a more general term in saying love in the time of lockdown. But of course, I like that love in the lockdown. Anything with a bit of alliteration in there.
You like it?
Yeah, I like it. But we changed the title. And actually, I think my publisher didn't want to date it as well. So he has his input on that. Yeah. So Love in the Time of Lockdown, yes. That's probably one I'm going to read. How did you guess? She just knew she's very professional.
Would you like to read?
I might as well, And this story was about being in lockdown and it's skin hunger, being deprived, you live on your own. If you can imagine that, all of you who don't have husbands and wives, whatever, so partners. So it was a hard time. So I'm writing about that. And it's really about, wanted to write, in the past, when I've written about sex, it tends to be about younger people because it's more visually appealing. It's, all of these things. But I really wanted to do, I want to now look more about relationships for menopausal women and things like that. Why not, give us, we're sexual beings. And so that's really why I wrote this story. So this is Love in the Time of Lockdown, and I'm on Tinder. So, flicking through the profiles, I began to consider my potential suitors. I avoided the men who posed in their sunglasses, the men who posed with children, and definitely the men who posed with their pet dog. One thing I was starting to realize on Tinder was that if the only photo they give you is a headshot, it means they're fat. Some men talked of looking for something serious, and I instantly swiped left. What I've always looked for in life is an endless honeymoon. I'm an epicure, a hedonist, a bacchanalianist, hard to say. People think I'm into no-feeling sex, but I'm so romantic, I find romance in the unromantic, meaning in the meaningless, feeling in the feelingless. Years ago, there was this steamy sex film with Mickey Rourke and Kim Basinger called 9.5 Weeks, but to me, 9 weeks counts as a long-term relationship. The truth is, I don't enjoy the quotidian realness of a relationship, the arguments, the submission, the compromise. I'd far rather have 1 day of ideal over a year of real. Life is much too short for repetition. At last, I found the perfect profile, a selfie displaying his serious brown eyes and full lips with an unprepossessing grey wall behind. The naturalness of it. He was so real, I knew he'd be ideal. I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but life is full of contradictions and ambivalence. It was his words that made the greatest impression. Looking for no-string sex. Any age, size, shape, race, religion. I don't have a type, just know what I like when I see it. Not looking for a relationship, but doesn't have to be a one-time thing. The delicious honesty of it. He didn't give his name, but his initials, AM, so I guessed he was married. Not that it mattered, as that was up to his own conscience. The best thing was that he was 12 years younger. What could I do but press like? And he liked back, making us an instant match. Then we messaged back and forth. Obviously, I had to establish that he wasn't an axe murderer or stalker without actually asking if he was such. I just read about a woman murdered by her Tinder date and found in a forest. That wasn't quite the forest walk I had in mind. Okay, so they message a bit. And after 2 weeks of we'll go to here. The day before meeting, he kept coming across as a strange mix of nerves and confidence. I meant to ask, he said, how would you like my privates to be presented? On a silver salver, I was thinking. And then he continued, hairy, trimmed or shaved. I don't mind at all, as long as you feel comfortable. Natural is grand, unless we're going to be filming a porno movie. I think I might be too nervous for filming a porno, lol. There's still a chance you might scream and run away when you see me at the door, lol. Haha, there's always a chance you might turn and hightail it down the road yourself, lol. I will be a bundle of nerves for sure, but my desire to get my hands on your naked body will stop me from running away. Oh, and don't worry too much about makeup or anything. I'd be happy to see you whatever you are comfortable with. Makeup? It'd be lucky to have me showered at 8 a.m. The only thing I would ask, he said, was for you to wear a pair of panties. I'd very much like to peel them off you. That's cool with me. That night it began to snow and the gusting wind kept blowing the flakes upwards. Under the streetlight they looked like celebratory sparks of fireworks. I was so excited I kept waking up every hour. By the morning, when his work van rolled up, snowflakes were drifting from the sky as desultorily as petals from the cherry trees. I watched this giant of a man walk up to my front door. His face was exactly like his photo, only it was live, and he smiled when he saw me. We kissed and I could taste cigarette smoke. Want to come upstairs, I asked. You bet I do, he grinned. Upstairs, we kissed some more. Then we got undressed and I let him unclip my bra and pulled my pants down as he danced. He was built like a barrel-chested strongman, or an axe wielder, though he tried to suppress the thought. Almost instantly, he was down on his knees on the hard floor, worshipping my body, his hands roving all over my skin, his lips kissing me devoutly. I felt like a sex saint, a swami, a guru, and it made the blood beat in my veins. He lifted me up so my feet were off the ground and set me on his knee, his fingers entering me, and I had a strange sensation of being a ventriloquist dummy on his lap. You're really light, he said, moving me onto the bed. I'm a tall woman and not used to being lifted up like a baby or a new bride, but for the first time in my life, I felt tiny. His fingers were full of small nicks and frets. I asked about the tattoos on his upper arm and he told me they were Japanese symbols for evil, demons, vengeance, all the dark things. Sometimes it's better not to be curious, but luckily enough, there was no symbol for murder. He kissed me again with his soft, full lips, and I loved the drag of his goatee as he moved down my body. He buried his face in my flesh, his forehead turning a vivid pink, his eyes bloodshot. I could feel his tongue, lips and jaw moving laterally like a wolf shaking its prey. Through the open window, a seagull called out in longing. He went on top, moving my legs so my ankles bounced lightly off his ribs, then pulling them up for deeper penetration so that my heels clapped off his clavicles. I could feel the scream in my hamstrings, but I didn't want to stop. I wanted to bend and stretch to his desire. My body had no say in it. I think we'll finish there.
Thank you. We've got Caroline McGuinness, who's described you as Rosemary Jenkinson's Belfast's Pleasure Laureate. Are you happy to take that laurel?
Love it.
You love it.
Totally honoured. Pleasure laureate. Yeah, any laurel. Actually, a writer will take any laurel. If you said, yeah, terrible laureate, I'd take it. Bad sex laureate, even I'd take it. Yeah.
Just a couple of questions I want to ask you before we ask the audience what they'd like to talk about. And that's the whole idea of being a writer from Northern Ireland. And so one of the first things would be, do you think that writers from Northern Ireland, you know, producing short story collections or whatever else, are asked more about politics, are expected to be more politically engaged than perhaps writers who live in Wolverhampton or writers who are from Hartlepool.
Completely, yeah, we are, yeah. Well, I suppose we are sort of, yeah, asked about, well, for instance, the Good Friday Agreement was a huge thing, and you get questions on that. I'm sure you've had, like, you might get journalists ask you what you think. So really, you do have to think about politics if you want to be a writer here. I mean, I know you're less political than some, but you're still asked, and it's an important aspect of here. Yeah.
And you write, Rosemary, you also would write for the Irish Times, you would write opinion pieces. And what I wanted to ask you about was the sort of difference between you in real life. So Rosemary on the Craiga Road, wherever I see Rosemary, go up. On the Craiga Road, Woodstock Road, and then you, the writer, and then also you, the person who produces non-fiction or will write these quite spiky pieces, mischievous pieces, I would say, at times for a newspaper like the Irish Times. Could you talk a little bit about that? The different versions of you, or are they all the same version?
Yeah, well, sometimes we have versions of people we would like to be, or so sometimes, yeah, there's the more outspoken person, which I would be for the Irish Times or other. I think so. Although I also think if I write in the first person narrative, sometimes that's also a different version of myself, a more flippant, light, comic self. So I suppose we've all got that. And on the Craiga Road, well, obviously, yeah. Obviously less spiky, much less, and more into finding crisps to eat, just sort of like more everyday person sort of things than, yeah. But you're really asking about, yeah, is that truly me when I write things that I know might be a little controversial and that people might not agree with? Is that
because what
true?
I think is you embrace that in a way that some people might actually want to very consciously avoid.
Yeah, I think I made a decision really that, I think a lot of writers in Irish literature particularly are very conservative about what they say, and they don't want to say too much because it's dangerous. It can be dangerous writing about mentioning other writers in certain ways, or genres of writing. Other people get defensive. I mean, a lot of writers are very defensive, and I know that. I do think about that, but my desire to sort of talk about writing, I'm so into writing, I just want to express that. And if some people disagree, then so be it, really. I can't, I'm not out to offend, but particularly in the social media era that we live in, people are more likely to group together and be offended. But also, I'm a passionate believer in free speech, and that I won't back down on that. If I've said something, that is it. I'm not going to retract that. It is done, and I believed it. And sometimes, though, you said about mischievous, sometimes I'm sort of provoking a little at the edges, and that's it. But it's to make it a wonderful piece, and a piece that people are going to question and respond to. Sometimes you just have to go for it. There's nothing in life worse than if at the end of your writing days you said, I didn't go for it enough, Yeah.
And you think you go for it in the stories?
No, not as much. I think I do go for it in a certain way, but I think you need more subtlety. I think to do a good story, an opinion piece is a totally different thing. So yeah, much more nuanced, and yeah, that's a gentler self comes out there. Yeah.
Fascinating. Let's open it to the floor here. If there's anybody that has got a question, anything that you've maybe been thinking about whenever we've been talking that you'd like to
Unless
ask.
you've covered everything.
Well, there's a few more up my sleeve if people haven't got anything further.
I have a would like to maybe start just a little bit.
Oh.
All right. Would you start?
Yeah, thank you. A great conversation, great collection. and it's a collection. They really come together in love this variety. Question I had, in terms of looking at the collection, what story or stories did you find most challenging to put together, whether creatively putting together or because of the topic in the story?
Oh, that's a really hard one. I'm just going to have to survey them all because I can't really remember what was the most difficult. As such, all of them have unique challenges, I guess. Because even if I do something like Love in the Time of Lockdown, I mean, it's challenging because I'm trying to make a shape out of everyday life. So it's kind of harder to make a story out of, you know, this is something that is just happening in lockdown. You know, how do I make a story out of that? Other difficult ones, oh God, yeah, probably Storm on the Board, probably the last one, because it is about, it's usually, the hard thing I think is to put the two different, there's always, when I write a short story, I put two different dimensions together, and it's a political one, maybe with their personal life story of what's going on. The two things are running in tandem. So there's a problem in the political life, and then a problem in the private life, and maybe there's a conflagration, and I suppose, yeah, maybe the last one, which sort of ends up, yeah, there's two things all coming together in fire at the very sort of end. Yeah, so those are probably difficult, just to get the two. How do you get the two stories to conclude at the very end? Yeah, that's a challenge.
Could I ask you a question just relating to yours there, which was a good point to do with, it's a collection, it's not just like some random short stories. Sometimes people talk with short story collections about that sort of gestalt effect, where you've got something that's adding up more than the sum of its parts. Is that what you're aiming for with this one? That there's an impact on the reader that's more than just the separate stories?
Well, only the fact that this is what contemporary life is like right now. That's my only impact. Yeah, but good question. Yeah, yeah.
Someone else over here with a question also?
This isn't really about short stories, but it's something that you referred to earlier. I mean, one of your more provocative articles was about, I can't break down the detail, but something about novel randomization, short story, I think was more difficult or something. And then we found your novel coming out, so we got PR for that. And then you wrote something else and stopped the novel coming out. Are we going to see a novel anytime soon?
Well, Linnell Library has published my digital novel, which is the second exciting installment of one chapter a year for 34 years, is coming out in September. So it's a slow novel, a slow cooking novel. Well, it's already written, but it'll get there.
Nothing else?
Nothing, well, no. The novel from before that was dropped by my former publisher, over the article, I should say, is sitting in the drawer, potentially waiting for a more favorable time, let's say. Yeah, I haven't done very much with that. I think there was also just sort of, you know, when something's been dropped, you don't feel so positive about a thing that has happened, and maybe I like the fact that it'll never be published, and it was the kind of the famous dropped novel. You know, there's a lot of things sometimes, yeah.
Maybe people will only be able to read it in your archive.
Yeah, exactly. It's for you. Leave it for you, Samantha. That's it. For posterity, exactly. So there's always those, because I think, yeah, I'm always thinking about posterity. I don't know about you, Wendy, if you are, but I tend to think of that in a big sense.
Do you?
Yeah, I do. Yeah.
Hi. You mentioned earlier that some plays have been seen in various places around the world. And I was wondering about short stories and whether the reception has been different outside Ireland, because short story here obviously is everywhere. I'm translated it into Spanish, and I tried to pitch a short story collection from here to Spanish publishers. So it's really hard because short stories in Spain are not popular at all. So have you had any experiences in that sense? Have they been translated into all the languages? Have they been well received outside Ireland?
No, well, really, what can I say about my particular short stories have not really traveled very much. I mean, they're maybe gone, some sort of international distribution, but some of them haven't. The majority of my short story collections haven't been internationally distributed. So, that Wendy could probably say more about translation, because I actually had, I've only had one short story translated into Slovenian, because Literature Ireland do that. They're great for actually promoting. But in a way, because I'm with a small publisher, you have to be with a big publisher in order to get that, so that's the thing. Wendy, what about you in translation? What have you found?
Well, I've had a few things. So the first collection was translated into Arabic and Italian.
Whoa.
And then through Literature Ireland, we've got one of the stories, the longest story for the second collection, which is quite hefty, really. It's been translated into Icelandic. So yeah, there's been a few things, but yeah, I tend to think of short story writing as being almost one step up from fanzine writer. That's what it feels like to me. A lot of the time, I think it's probably moving in the right direction. It's different to how it used to be. But we suppose there's to be certain places like South America where short stories are really, really popular. I think they're really well received. But yeah,
should be. I mean, short story's big in America, really. I mean, it should be big, a big market for us. But translated, I'm not sure which countries in Europe are the most short story friendly. I wouldn't even know. We wouldn't know, would we?
No.
But I mean, you're going to South Korea on that sort of on the back. You get invited sometimes to foreign destinations with short stories. So in fact, it gets you out there, which is good. Yeah.
Is there anything that you can't find inspiration in? Do you not believe in your book? Or can you disregard things that you see in novel form?
God, yeah. I suppose, yeah. I certainly don't write historical stories, but I might use it as a slight memory in something. But so it'll never be primary. I think there's a difference between using things as a primary source and a secondary source. So most things are used in a secondary source. So it's just downgrading whatever. I suppose. But that's a really interesting question. What do you choose? But certainly, some people, people say to you, that'll make a really good short story. When they say that, it never does. No. And in fact, it puts you off. Even those words are like the kiss of death. But yeah, people will say, oh yeah, it'd be, there's a great philosopher who lived in such and such. He'd make a great short story. No, he would not. It's so much more. You only see it yourself. What is a good short story through another person's eyes is not good. So it's very individual.
It's very true. That's, if somebody says, they start talking to me and saying, don't be using this for one of your stories. Don't worry. I think there's another question.
I just wondered, did you ever read any of Wendy? She wrote for the Irish Times too, and I think it sold a lot of papers, because I know it was the first column I used to go to on Saturday. But when you said you were a story gatherer, I thought that was very interesting. She was renowned for ear wigging, but I don't think she could write a short story. She was so verbose.
Yeah, she was verbose. Yeah, you would be surprised she shut up for enough time on the bus to overhear people. Yeah, but yeah, of course, being verbose is great because you chat to the next person on the bus, but obviously traveling is a good way of getting stories. I mean, it really is. So yeah, there's so many ways of gathering. I find pubs, but traveling also is a close second. I haven't read Maeve Binchy. I don't think I'm sorry, I was a snob. I think I thought of her as a kind of more popular writer of that time, and it just wouldn't. But I know she's a very good writer, and I have read some of her articles, which are really great.
So a friend of mine who was very good, described her as a blather.
Yeah, I think she's like the version of Marion Keyes, isn't she? The previous. Yeah, there's always, you find that tradition in writers that just sort of every era has a blether, as you say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, those were you mentioned earlier that you had an eye towards posterity. And you seem surprised by that, Wendy. So maybe this is something both of you could speak about. How does that affect your creativity? How does that affect what you actually put on the page?
No, do you know, it doesn't affect so much what I put on the page because that would be totally overwhelming. I think if you think, oh, is this my masterpiece? I mean, I've gone through that phase. I think when you start writing, you sort of think, oh my God, this has to be my master. I have to break through with this piece of work. And obviously it's self-defeating. Again, that's a kiss of death thing if you put too much expectation on your own shoulders. But I think about it in terms of what I do with the work. I think that's what I mean. It's more of a strategic thing of what I think. And I think that the articles are sort of contributing to that because it's a way of if I explain what I'm trying to do through my fiction. I mean, some writers will never do that, explain what they're trying to do. It's just like, don't go there. That's for the critics. But I want to do that, and that's kind of, it's also putting historical context on my own work, and I think it's a good thing for posterity.
Yeah, I suppose, I was just thinking that as far as I'm concerned, when you're dead, and this is not going to be a concern to you whatsoever when you're 6 feet under as to how anybody's responding to your work. So there's that dimension to it. But last week I had the honour of interviewing Deirdre Madden, and she was saying about how if you need to put work into, or don't try to work quickly, work slowly, because this thing will have an existence beyond you, hopefully, so why rush something that may well have an existence for the next couple of 100 years? I thought that was brilliant, and I think that's really what you're saying as well. Rosemary, but what I also think is that it's capricious. The future's a capricious thing. And we know people from 19th century, 18th century that have absolutely dropped out of all consciousness now. And other people who were not celebrated at the time whenever they were writing, who now we hold as, something quite remarkable, like Emily Dickinson or whatever. So I think there's such an unpredictability to it. It's difficult really to say, but yeah, I do think that you do want to try to do your best possible work beyond just the moment, or the month, or the year.
Yeah, you do. I mean, on terms of that, I think it's your private life. I think is a very important thing for writers because that in posterity, I think what you do during your life is very important. I think it's all part of cult of personality and the things that will make you famous in the future. So I think about these things a lot more. Doesn't mean I necessarily do these things all the time, but I think how things myself will feed in, how I can feed into the writing as well, what I do in life. I don't know. Yeah, but it's interesting. Yeah.
Maybe there's probably time. I think there's definitely time for one more question if anyone has one.
Hello. I remember about, I think maybe 20 years ago, going to the short story festival in Sussex to see John McGahern. And a member of the audience, this is another question about the process of writing. A member of the audience asked him if, when he sat down at his desk to write, if he knew whether he was going to, if he was writing a short story or a novel. And his answer was interesting because he said that after a couple of paragraphs, he knew whether to abandon the process or not. Because if he was committed to writing a short story and he felt that this was not a short story, he knew within a couple of paragraphs. And I wondered whether you had a similar problem or dilemma. But in your case, short story or play, is there a huge gulf between those two processes?
Yeah, obviously play is a much more plot-driven thing that I think, and a short story isn't. So it will really depend if I have an idea for, a sort of characters interwoven and how that, a huge journey. And this is just so brief. I know instinctively with an idea whether it's going to be, I've never actually used a short story idea for a playwriting idea or vice versa. So I think I know immediately before even I get to the page. So it's already in the head. I think I know exactly what I'm doing. So John McGarren obviously took a couple. I'm quicker than John McGarren. That's better. Wow. That's good. Yeah, great.
I think that's probably us.
Yes, so I'm going to say about, so this is on sale. If anybody would like a copy, it's £12, so it's there. And it's cash only though. We don't have one of those credit things.
But you will get your copy signed, and that is worth so much that for posterity.
For posterity, that's absolutely it.
Thank you so much to all of you for such an engaging discussion, but especially thank you to Rosemary and to Wendy for terrific conversation. Thank you so much.